Hey there, welcome. I'm here to help you relax tonight. So before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It really makes us feel like the global community it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's begin our evening together. Story 16. It watches from the windows. The house on Cypress Lane was a bargain because of the windows. They were everywhere, floor-to-ceiling panes that flooded the space with light, offering unobstructed views of a sprawling backyard and the dense woods beyond. For a photographer like me, it was perfect. Natural light was everything. The real estate agent mentioned offhandedly that the previous owners had loved the view, but moved suddenly for a job opportunity. She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. The first week was idyllic. I unpacked my cameras, set up my darkroom in the basement, and spent my days capturing the way the light danced through the leaves. But by the second week, I started feeling it, the sensation of being watched. It was subtle at first, a prickle on the back of my neck while I edited photos at my desk. The uneasy feeling that the shadows in the woods were just a little too still. I dismissed it as paranoia. I was alone for the first time in years, fresh off a messy divorce and living in a new town. Of course, I felt exposed. But then the reflection started. I'd be washing dishes at the kitchen sink, staring absently at my own reflection in the black glass of the night window. And I'd see it, a flicker of movement behind me in the empty room. I'd spin around, heart hammering, to find nothing there. It was always in the periphery, always in the glass. A shape shifting in a mirror as I passed. A dark figure standing just behind my shoulder in the darkened TV screen. I began avoiding the windows at night, drawing the curtains before sunset. But the house had so many eyes. It felt like closing the lids on a sleeping giant. The photographs were the first concrete evidence. I'd taken to leaving my camera on a tripod in the living room, manually set to take long exposure shots of the moonlit woods throughout the night. I told myself it was for an art project. Really, I was trying to catch something, anything, in the darkness outside. The first few nights yielded nothing but blurred trees and star trails. But on the fourth night, I found it. In a shot taken at 3:17 a.m., there was a face. It wasn't in the woods. It was in the window. Pale, elongated, with dark holes where eyes should be. It was pressed against the glass from the outside, its features distorted by the pain. But the direction of the gaze was unmistakable. It wasn't looking into the room. It was looking at the reflection, at the camera's lens, at me. My blood turned to ice. I tore the photo from the printer, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was intelligent. This knew what a camera was. I spent the next day in a haze of fear, checking and rechecking the locks on every door and window. I called a security company and ordered motion sensor lights for the entire perimeter of the house. I was grasping at rational solutions for something that felt profoundly irrational. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat in the living room, all the lights on, the curtains drawn tight, with a kitchen knife on the coffee table. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Around 2 a.m., exhausted, I must have dozed off. I was woken by a sound. Talp, talp, talp. It was coming from the large picture window behind me. 3 precise, gentle knocks on the glass. I froze, too terrified to move, too terrified to breathe. Talp, talp, talp. It came again. Polite, patient. Slowly, mechanically, I turned my head. The curtains were drawn. I couldn't see out, but I could see the reflection in the black screen of the television across the room. Reflected in the screen was the window behind me, and pressed against the glass from the outside was the same pale, eyeless face from the photograph. It was tilted as if curious, and it was knocking. I don't know how long I sat there, locked in a silent staring contest with the thing's reflection. It didn't move. It didn't knock again. It just waited. My mind raced, scrambling for any logical foothold. Sleep paralysis? A hallucination? But the knife was still cold in my hand. The fabric of the couch was rough under my fingers. This was real. A thought, insane and desperate, wormed its way into my panic. It hasn't come inside. The windows are a barrier. The thing in the reflection seemed to sense my shift in thought. Its head tilted slightly the other way. A silent question. Slowly, ever so slowly, I raised my hand. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the television screen, on its reflection. I lifted my hand and waved. The thing in the reflection went perfectly still. Then, after a moment that stretched into eternity, it raised its own pale, elongated hand, and it waved back. The absurdity of it broke the paralyzing fear. This wasn't a monster trying to get in. This was something else, something trying to communicate. I stood up, my legs weak. I kept my back to the window, my eyes on the TV screen. I took a step toward the kitchen. The thing's reflection watched me. I grabbed a dry erase marker from the counter, a relic from a forgotten shopping list. I walked to the television, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't break eye contact with the reflection. I raised a marker, and on the black screen of the TV, I wrote one word. Who? I stepped back. The thing outside watched the word appear. It seemed to consider. Then it raised its finger. On the outside of the window pane, it began to write. I couldn't see it directly, but I could see its movements reflected in the TV screen. It traced letters on the glass. WATC Chiar. Watcher. The word hung in the air between us, a bridge made of reflection and fear. A watcher. What did that mean? A ghost? A spirit? Something else entirely? I wrote another word on the TV screen. Why? The watcher's finger moved again, tracing its answer on the window pane. To see, to observe. It wasn't hostile. It was curious. My fear, while still a live wire in my gut, was now mixed with a dawning, terrifying fascination. I was a subject of study. What? I wrote. What do you see? The watcher was still for a long time. Then it wrote you. The light. The dark in between. It was talking about my life. My loneliness. The shadows of my divorce that I carried with me into this bright, empty house. It could see more than my physical form. How? I scrawled, the marker squeaking against the screen. The glass remembers, it wrote back. The windows are eyes. The mirrors are doors. I looked through. The windows are eyes. The mirrors are doors. The thought made me dizzy. Every pane of glass in my house was a potential pupil, a lens for this thing to peer through. My sanctuary was observatory, and I was the exhibit. I had to know more. The artist in me, the part that craved understanding the bizarre and the beautiful, overruled the part that wanted to scream and hide. Where? I wrote. Where are you from? The watcher's response was swift. The other side of the glass. Before I could process that, it wrote again. You seek to capture light. The moment. I watch it pass. We are not so different. A profound and eerie connection settled over me. This thing, this watcher, was a fellow observer. A photographer of souls, using windows instead of cameras. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now intertwined with a thread of empathy. We were both alone, both watchers. I wrote one final word, my hand trembling. Friend? The watcher didn't move. It didn't write. For a long moment, it just stared at my reflection, its eyeless gaze seeming to look through me, into the very core of my being. Then, slowly, it raised its hand again. It didn't wave. It placed its pale palm flat against the glass, a gesture of connection, of acknowledgement. In the reflection, I saw my own hand rise. I pressed my palm against the cool wall next to the television, mirroring its gesture. A silent pact between two observers, separated by a barrier neither of us could cross. A moment passed, then another, and then it was gone. The reflection in the TV screen showed only the empty window. I was alone again, but the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, understood. The next few days were a paradox of terror and tranquility. The watcher was true to its name. It watched. I'd feel its presence sometimes, a soft focus in the air, near a window, a particular stillness in a reflection. But the knocking didn't return. The face didn't reappear. It was a silent observer. I stopped closing the curtains. I found myself talking to it sometimes, aloud, as I moved through the house. That's a northern flicker, I'd say, pointing to a bird on the feeder outside the kitchen window. Or, the light is particularly beautiful this afternoon. It felt less crazy than writing on the TV screen. I started leaving my photographs on the table by the largest window, portraits of the woods, of the sky, of the way the light fell at different times of day. An offering, a shared gallery. Once, I came downstairs in the morning to find one of the photos slightly moved. It was a close-up of a dew-covered spiderweb. It was now centered on the table, positioned with an exacting precision I never would have used. It was looking at my work. A bizarre routine settled in. I would create. It would observe. The fear never entirely left. It was like living with a powerful, wild animal that had chosen, for now, not to eat you. There was a constant, low hum of danger, but also a thrilling sense of privilege. I began to experiment. I set up mirrors opposite windows, creating infinite tunnels of reflection. I leave old family photos out, wondering if it could see the stories in them. The air in the house began to feel charged, thick with silent observation. I was no longer lonely, but I was more isolated than ever. How could I explain this to anyone? Who would believe that the thing haunting my windows was not a monster, but a critic, a connoisseur of captured light? I was sharing my life with a ghost in the glass, and part of me never wanted it to leave. The change happened gradually. The watcher's presence, once a subtle focusing of light, began to intensify. The air near the windows grew cold. The reflections started to linger a second too long after I moved away. I'd catch glimpses of it in peripheral vision more frequently, not just at night, but in the bright light of day. A pale smudge in the bathroom mirror as I brushed my teeth. A tall, thin shadow cast from a sunlit window where no object stood to create it. It was no longer just watching from the other side. It was pressing closer. The barrier was thinning. The silent companionship began to feel like silent scrutiny. My peaceful routine became a performance. I felt the need to be interesting, to create worthy subjects for its gaze. I stopped taking photos for myself and started taking them for it. More dramatic, more stark, trying to capture a beauty dark enough to hold its attention. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie in bed, feeling the pressure of its gaze through the uncovered window, knowing it was out there in the dark, watching my room, watching me. The intimacy had become oppressive. One night I broke. I'd spent the day trying to photograph a storm rolling in over the woods, the light a bruised purple and green. The photos were stunning, eerie. I left them on the table by the window proud. But that night, as the storm broke, I felt its disappointment. It's a hard feeling to describe, but it was as palpable as a drop in temperature. The images weren't enough. They were just copies, shadows of the real thing. I felt a pull, a compulsion. I found myself walking to the large picture window, the one where it had first knocked. The storm was raging outside, wind whipping the trees, rain lashing the glass. In the window's reflection, I saw it. The watcher was there, closer than ever before. Its form was clearer, more defined. I could see the smooth, poreless texture of its skin, the profound darkness within its eye sockets. It wasn't looking at the storm. It was looking at my reflection, and it slowly raised its hand, pointing not at me, but at the window latch. A command, an invitation. It didn't want to watch the storm through the glass. It wanted to feel the rain. The sound of the storm faded into a dull roar in my ears. All I could see was that pale finger pointed at the latch. All I could feel was the watcher's will, a cold, insistent pressure inside my own mind. Open it. This was the line I couldn't cross. The barrier was the only thing that kept our strange relationship safe. It was the frame around the photograph. Without it, the image would bleed into reality, and reality would be forever altered. I shook my head, a tiny, frantic movement. No, I whispered, my voice swallowed by the thunder. In the reflection, the watcher's head tilted. It didn't seem angry. It seemed confused. Why would I not want this? Why would I not want to remove the final barrier between us? To let it fully into the world it had only ever observed. Its finger remained pointed. The compulsion grew stronger. My hand lifted, seemingly of its own volition, reaching for the brass latch on the window. No, no, no. The word was a mantra in my head, but my body wasn't listening. I was a puppet, and my strings were being pulled by a master who lived in the reflections. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the latch. A memory flashed. The real estate agents averted eyes. The previous owners loved the view, but moved suddenly. They hadn't moved. They had opened the window. The thought broke the trance for a single, vital second. I yanked my hand back as if burned, stumbling away from the window, falling onto the rug. I looked up at the reflection in the TV screen. The watcher was no longer calm. Its placid curiosity had vanished, replaced by a silent, raging fury. Its mouth, a feature I'd never noticed before, opened in a soundless scream, a black hole of utter emptiness. The windows in the reflection began to frost over, a creeping film of ice spreading from the edges inward. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath misted in the air. It wasn't asking anymore. The glass began to crack. It started at the center of a large picture window, a single hairline fracture that split with a sound like a gunshot. Then another and another, spiderwebbing across the pane. It wasn't breaking from the force of the storm. It was breaking from the inside, from the pressure of the watcher's rage on the other side of the reflection. I scrambled backward on my hands and feet, crab walking away from the window, my eyes fixed on the terrifying mosaic of cracking glass. The reflection in each shard was a tiny, fragmented image of the watcher's screaming face. The frost on the windows thickened, crystalline patterns blooming like deadly flowers. The wind outside howled, but it was a distant thing. The real storm was inside the house, inside the glass. I bumped into the television stand. The black screen showed the chaos from a dozen different angles. A cubist nightmare of breaking windows and screaming faces. I had to do something. I couldn't let it through. An idea, desperate and insane, flashed in my mind. The glass remembers. The mirrors are doors. If it could use them, maybe I could too. I lunged for the fireplace, grabbing the heavy iron poker. I ignored the cracking sounds behind me and ran to the hallway, to the large antique mirror that hung there. I didn't hesitate. I swung the poker with all my strength. The mirror shattered, not into 1,000 pieces, but into 100, each shard clattering to the floor. A deafening, silent shriek of pure agony filled my mind. It wasn't a sound. It was a wave of pain and fury that made me clutch my head and cry out. I looked back toward the living room. The cracking had stopped. The windows were still cracked, but they were no longer fracturing. The frost was receding. I had heard it. I had closed one of its doors, but it was still there, and it was angry. A new sound began, a tapping, but not the polite knocking from before. This was frantic, angry, desperate. Tap, 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 tap. It came from every window, every piece of glass in the house at once. A terrifying staccato symphony. The patio door, the kitchen windows, the glass covering my photographs, the face of my wristwatch. It was trapped, and it was pounding on all the barriers at once, trying to find a weak spot. I ran through the house, poker in hand, becoming a whirlwind of destruction. I smashed the bathroom mirror. I shattered the glass coffee table. I knocked pictures from the walls, stomping on the glass that covered them. With each shattering crash, the psychic scream in my head intensified, a feedback loop of pain and rage. But the tapping didn't stop. It got faster, louder. I stumbled into the kitchen, slipping on a shard of glass from a broken photograph. I fell hard, the poker skittering away from me. I looked up. The window above the sink was a web of cracks, but it was still holding. And in every single fractured fragment, the watcher's face was staring down at me, its mouth open in that endless, silent scream. It was done asking. It was done watching. It wanted out, and it was willing to break everything to get to me. The tapping reached a fever pitch, a single, sustained note of violence. And then silence. The sudden quiet was more terrifying than the noise. I pushed myself up, grabbing the edge of the counter, my cut hand smearing blood on the formica. The window above the sink was gone. Not broken. Gone. In its place was a hole. Not into the stormy night, but into a profound, lightless blackness. A void. The other side of the glass. And from that void, a long, pale arm was reaching through, its slender fingers stretching toward my face. I screamed and threw myself backward, falling against the refrigerator. The arm paused, its fingers twitching, as if tasting the air of my kitchen. It was real, solid. The barrier was broken. It began to reach further, the rest of its form starting to emerge from the absolute blackness of the void. A shoulder, its elongated, hairless head. This was it. It was coming through. My hand, scrabbling blindly on the floor behind me, closed around the cold metal of the fireplace poker. There was no time to think, no time for fear. As the watcher's head fully emerged into the world, its eyeless gaze fixing on me with ancient hunger, I didn't swing the poker at it. I swung it at the window next to the void, the one that was still cracked but intact. The glass exploded inward. But this wasn't a window into the night. This was a window into daylight, the bright, sunny afternoon from 2 days ago when I'd taken the photo of the spiderweb. The past. The watcher's head snapped toward the new opening. Its scream was no longer silent. It was a high, piercing shatter of sound that broke every remaining light bulb in the house. The paradox of two different times existing in the same space was agony to it, a violation of its very nature. It recoiled, its arm whipping back from me, clutching its head. The void behind it wavered, flickering like a bad signal. I didn't stop. I swung the poker again, hitting another cracked window. This one shattered into a view of last week's rainstorm. Then another, showing a starry night from a month ago. I was shattering time itself, creating a chaotic mosaic of stolen moments, a hall of mirrors with no consistent reflection. The watcher thrashed, disoriented, unable to focus, unable to exist in the cacophony of broken chronology. The void it had crawled through began to shrink, to fracture itself. With a final, ear-splitting shriek, it was pulled back, sucked into the collapsing void. The last thing I saw was its pale, desperate hand clawing at the edge of my reality before it vanished. The void snapped shut. The windows were just windows again, looking out onto the stormy, present-day night. Rain and wind blew in through the broken panes. I was alone, truly alone. The house was a wreck. Glass littered every surface. Wind and rain whipped through the shattered windows. But it was over. In the days that followed, as I boarded up the windows and swept up the glass, I found a single, untouched shard from the hallway mirror. I picked it up. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in its depth, a pale, distant figure, watching from a great distance. But it was just a trick of the light. I had closed the doors. I had shattered the eyes. But sometimes in the dead of night, I'll catch my reflection in the dark screen of my phone or the surface of a glass of water. And for a split second, my reflection won't move quite in time with me. It will hold still just a moment too long, and I'll feel a familiar, cold prickle on the back of my neck. The watcher is gone, but the feeling of being watched remains. Because once you know the windows are eyes, you can never really close them again.